Good morning.
Greetings, everyone. Hey, CK.
It's August 9th, 2021, and this is episode 220.
220.
And Friday it'll be 222, which is like some sort of magic number, I bet.
Wow, that's a big flashback to that TV show, Room 222.
What's that?
You may not even remember that.
It's like Welcome Back, Kotter. What is that? Like, what is that?
Yeah, sort of like it. It was about a high school. It's one of these like high school dramas. So from the early days of TV,
like the 30s.
Yeah. When we had to get on a bicycle to generate our own electricity to watch television.
That's where we're headed.
Yeah, it is where we're headed.
Fits the theme vaguely. Yeah, today we're talking about uncertainty. This too shall pass. Like, where is this all headed? What do we do about it? How do we think about it? But first, we will introduce ourselves as usual. I'm Ash Van Steenwyk. I direct the Center for Prophetic Imagination.
And I'm Daniel Wolpert. I direct Micah, the Minnesota Institute of Contemplation and Healing. And good morning, Kathleen. And thinking of you, you had your daughter's memorial service on Saturday. So I hope that went as well as possible. I saw some pictures of it. So times of uncertainty. I wrote about this probably a week and a half ago about this notion of an unstable future.
Mm-hmm.
And a number of people wrote back and said, well, the future is always uncertain, which is true. However, we again, as a general society, not every individual, but we as a general society have been functioning with the notion that the future is stable. And I mean, that has been, again, generally speaking, statistically, a pretty reasonable gross approximation.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that's becoming increasingly clear is that may no longer be a reasonable approximation.
And this is, this too shall pass, that fable that I wrote in the description. I mean, sometimes people attribute it to King Solomon, but it's really more, that's kind of more of a modern innovation. But another thing that King Solomon is attributed to saying is, vanity of vanities, there's nothing new under the sun. And again, there's some truth to that.
Mm-hmm.
But when we say that somehow the crises that we're facing now are just same old, it dismisses the alarm that is suitable and is totally valid. And, you have all these conservative-leaning scholars. I can't remember that dude from Canada, Stephen Pinkerton. Is that his name? I can't remember. The dude who wrote basically, "Hey, we're less violent in the world now."
Oh, yes. I thought you were going to talk about Jorby Poopy Pants or whatever his name was.
I think that's the best variation of his name I've heard yet. Jorby Poopy Pants.
Yeah.
I'm sure he agrees with it, but there's also this idea like, look. Liberalism that, in the classic sense, classical liberalism bred a type of capitalism which is making things better, and we just got to lean into innovation. And before we started this, Dan was talking about, and you can maybe flesh this out in a second because I think it's fascinating, that how many thousands of acres in the Red River Valley are dedicated to growing sugar beets, which is where like crystal sugar comes from. And all that is unnecessary. We don't need that sugar. But the reason we are told we need it is for jobs. And the reason those jobs are needed is so that relatively wealthy people can accumulate wealth. So if you think about the way in which our society organizes itself towards innovation, it's towards the accumulation of wealth for the relative few. And so if that's the driving mechanism of innovation in your society, climate change is not a priority, nor is the only reason that the populace would be cared for is the extent to which they are useful as a workforce. Right. So none of that's going to be oriented towards how do we thrive as human beings. Now, contrast that with like Mongolian steppe nomads who developed the innovations of the yurt and the ways that they try to live in a way of somewhat reciprocity with the land, where the organizing principle is how do we function as a nomadic society and what kinds of infrastructure do we need for that? That's a different driving force of innovation. So like the way that we build homes, the way we get energy, the way we do agriculture, none of that is oriented towards how do we as a people thrive. It's about Crystal Sugar Dude, Gary Crystal. I don't know what his name, like, I don't know who runs, how they can extract wealth. And so this is the urgency piece. Like we can't, the earth isn't infinite, and our organizing principle is not towards thriving. So when people say, same old, to me, it diminishes all of that reality. And that's, to me, is terrifying.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the sugar agriculture thing to me is such a good example of this, right? So, yeah, so American Crystal Sugar grows 450,000 acres of sugar beets. Right?
Sweet.
450,000 acres, and which is just a fraction of the total acreage farmed in the Red River Valley, because there's a crop rotation, right? And so first of all, you've got all that land with all that input, all that energy, bigger and bigger tractors, blah, 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 all that resources going to making sugar, which, has zero nutritional value and is not a food and is not really helpful in any way, shape, or form. And the other thing about it is the only reason that we can do that here is because the government, the non-socialist government, right, which all these right-wing farmers want to support, the government has created price supports for American sugar so that American sugar does not float on the world market, because if it did, it would be competing against Dominican slave labor, and there would be no sugar grown in the United States. So the meta system, mm-hmm. right, is also required to create and support this thing. And then between those two, you have the banking system, right, through which huge amounts of this cash is flowing, right? So it supports the entire banking system and all of this. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, if you look at the Red River Valley, there's fewer and fewer people. The entire social structure is being destroyed. You have fewer kids, you have fewer families, you have, fewer anything, right? And this biblical idea, right, of you're sitting alone in the midst of the land is exactly what's going on, and so, the average farm size has gone from 80 acres to almost 1,000 acres, right? And so the entire thing, and the people who are still left are being told and sold this bill of goods that this is somehow a good thing because sugar makes money, right? And meanwhile, when you look at the climate change thing, so 450,000 acres of sugar, it takes about an acre to support a family year-round, to feed a family year-round using intensive, sustainable agricultural methods. So you could take that same land and feed 2 million people, right? And you could also create, eco villages and all kinds of very interesting things that could be going on there. But but one of the things that's, I think, important for us to realize that we've harped upon so much is in our formation, we get this idea that this is the way.
We just lost Dan. I bet you Big Sugar was watching. And hopefully that wasn't okay. I was worried that some sort of like sugar missile hit your.
Yeah, sugar missile hit. We get this idea that this is the way reality has to be. And so we can't even imagine any other, any other way of doing things. But there are lots of other ways of doing things, right? So we get some comments coming in, which is great.
And this one's a big philosophical question, and which I know I am going to argue with. But Stefan writes, "History is a march of progress, though. Includes some back and forth, yes, but when we look at the large-scale picture, it is progress with regards to economic and political and women's and minority rights, etc., etc. Hegel, Marx, and Bakunin were right about that." I don't think that's true. I mean, yeah, if you look, depends on what slice of human history you look at and where.
Yeah.
And there's this idea that somehow, like, yes, if you look at Western civilization in the last 150 years, a case could be made, unless you stop. Like, what if Europe had been taken over? Like, there's too much mythic thinking there for me. Now, if you're saying that it's possible for progress to happen and that we've seen it in our lifetimes, well, for sure. We've also seen backwards movement. Yeah. And then also there's a question of one of the things Steven Pinkerton, his Better Angels book, which is the one I was trying to think of earlier, that the world's less violent. There could be a case for that. But violence towards who? If you have a strictly humanistic perspective and you're only looking at certain societies, then yes. So to me, this is something that's, I mean, there's truth there, but it has to be fleshed out and complexified, and we have to understand like how systems as a whole function and where's the downside. And if you're going to talk about sum total of human history and you're only going to look at the last 2,000 years, 3,000 years, then it's like, okay, what about the previous 100 and 100,000 years? Like, there's all sorts of questions it raises.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I am starting to feel more and more that this idea, which is totally embedded in our society, right, that we're making progress. I'm beginning to feel like it's like this is complete crap.
It's the only thing that Marxists and conservatives and like both agree about.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that there's a march of change. I mean, if we just want to say things change, yeah. Absolutely. If we want to say that technology changes, if we want to say that there are different rhythms in terms of, materialism and our technological capabilities, yeah. But I really want to say that we have to very much rethink this word progress. Because what I think is a much better image for what's going on is, and I actually preached on this many years ago. I think that the cat in the hat is a much better image for what's happening.
From the great philosopher, Seuss.
Yeah, Dr. Seuss, right? That this spot, right? The spot is all over the yard, and you're getting more and more of these cats showing up. And it's pushing us, to some sort of endpoint. But, we have to recognize that what we call indigenous people, which is basically just, the earliest groups of people that migrated all over the earth. I mean, they figured out how to function as human beings in society for hundreds of thousands of years. Modern society in 500 years has trashed the planet. Now, I'm not really sure what kind of level of progress that represents. Like, progress according to what? Yeah. So I understand that that's a popular idea. I'm not really convinced at all what the evidence is for it.
Now, no doubt we've had technological innovation and it increases our capacity for things.
Yeah, I mean, we've had change for sure.
And some of that change creates the possibility for good. So I don't want to throw away the idea that progress as a whole is something to be rejected. But to me, a better question, again, if we're going to bring up Marx and Bakunin and stuff, who has power? So like if in different society, like if the average people have more power in a society and people are less marginalized and those people have more access to innovations, then you could start calling that progress. But that can be taken away. Right. So that to me, it's like this back and forth we're talking about. Like if we talk about progress as a whole, like it almost becomes this eschatologically mythic quality of that humanity as a whole is evolving towards greater levels of consciousness as a foregone conclusion. And that institutions and societies have memory that's accurate, and we build upon accurate knowledge to greater knowledge. Those two ideas have too many assumptions embedded in it for it to be just categorically true. So we have to break apart the systems a little bit more than that. Like, who has power? What memory do institutions continue to preserve, and towards whose end? And like, where's it all going?
Yeah, and what's our definition of progress? I mean, are we talking about technology? Are we talking about the ability to manipulate the material world? Are we talking about human beings being more cared for? Are we talking about growth and awareness? I think that since that word is so loaded in our society and our culture, I think before we even begin to use it and assess it, we need to stop and go, wait a minute, is progress the S&P 500 going higher and higher, right? I mean, that's the way a lot of people define progress.
No, that's kind of the default way of measuring our society's health in the United States.
So anyway, more comments. We skipped one of CK's comments.
Oh. Well, and just, it'd be good to, maybe we can do a series on progress and get into some of the nuance, because it's not just like, progress is just... It's just like, no, we got to break that into these 12 different other categories and talk about each of those. CK writes, it seems very much like everything has to collapse before any changes can happen. That's often the case. Like when something becomes so irrefutable, and look, we're kind of seeing this. So like, remember when I was growing up, climate change was considered just a full-on hoax. Right. And then now I see more and more people are like, well, it's real. It's just naturally occurring. And then it's like, well, maybe we influence it, but it's not so bad because human beings are such geniuses. We'll figure a way out of it. And we have to double down on what we're doing. All that shift has happened in terms of the dominant narratives. And so it's delusional, but it is a greater reckoning of the facts. So which the downside is, I think you're right. Things have to get really bad before people start saying, oh, crap. Gus writes, consider along with those sugar beets. Largest crop in the U.S., yellow corn number 2.
Yep.
Inedible, subsidized, made for making high fructose, terribly inefficient feed for cows, tobacco, coffee, all zero nutritional value. And there's also lawns. Lawns are also a huge crop.
Lawns are the largest irrigated crop in America.
So what if, and this is where I start sounding more Marxist, and where I'm willing to be like, I'm an anarchist, but authoritarianism wouldn't be so bad if we could somehow force our society to what if we took sugar beets, inedible corn crops, like non-vegetable corn, and lawns, and started growing food? Like, what would that look like? I don't know. Okay, how do I pronounce this? Oh, fuck.
I think that was right when I disappeared. So
he was worried that you'd been taken out by the government.
By aliens.
Kathleen says, sugar does make money. It makes us sick, which supports it. That's the whole other angle. Like, what's the cost of sugar for those other things?
Well, and And I'm not sure if this was a satire. I didn't really dig deep enough, but it was presented as it was not. This article recently about this economist basically arguing that bicyclists were destroying the economy. And he kind of went through this whole list, like what you're talking about, Kathleen, right? So that if everybody bicycles, right, all of the other economic things that would collapse as a result of that, and one of them, was the healthcare industry, because people would be getting healthier, and so they would need less healthcare. um, yeah. So
This is just, again, like, we don't have people, like, this is the danger of how conservatism looks in our society. And I don't think, again, conservative is too broad of a category, but the way that we think of conservatives in our society tends towards individualistic responsibility, right? And so this idea of that somehow our society has all these assumptions baked in that we're formed into is like too big of an idea for some people. It's just too complex.
right.
and so that they can't imagine an alternative in their mind means that what we have is just common sense.
Right.
And
the best.
And we're the best. The greatest.
Right.
Dennis Prager on the jump of his show says it's Michael Medved. Greatest nation on God's green earth is his catch line. Okay, so like there's all this idea that whatever we're doing happens to be the best.
Yeah, God's green earth, which right now happens to be
God's
brown and on fire.
It's a big flaming turd is what it is right now.
All right, so let's keep moving. We got a lot of comments.
That wasn't clear. Coffee / tobacco not being big U.S. crops, but zero nutritional value. Yeah, so there's a lot of crops that do nothing good for us, but they're embedded with these assumptions of private property rights without limits and all sorts of things that don't have to be the way they are, and they haven't been for most of human history.
Right. No, I mean, the irony about capitalist agriculture is that the most profitable things to grow are drugs. Right. So, wine, sugar, coffee, tobacco, now marijuana, right? Coca, opium. I mean, these are the profitable agricultural crops, because in a capitalist system with a bountiful earth, feeding people is not profitable. It just isn't. And so again, we don't then look at our formation and go, well, wait a minute, maybe that's screwed up. Like, let's have another system. We just go, no, let's just grow more drugs to make more money. Like, how can we do that? And then Catherine's got a great point about the sugar beets. This is the next comment. Yeah, which I've been talking about for a while.
Catherine writes, am I remembering right that current beet sugar harvesting and processing methods also depend on cold winter temperatures? Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. And that recent warmer winters have messed with that?
Yes, you are remembering that correctly. So what they do is they harvest all the beets at once, and they put them outside in these giant piles, and the piles freeze, and then they take all winter to take the beets out of the piles and process them. Now, what's been happening is that freezing temperatures are coming later and later and later. And when there gets to a point where you don't have consistent freezing temperatures all the way maybe into December, you will not be able to use this system. And there's so many beets that there's no way you could create indoor storage systems for them. And what will happen is that the entire piles will compost, and then beets are ruined. And so, right, I mean, I've been bringing this up to people and farmers up here in this area for a long time now, and everybody's just wanting to be in denial about it. Like, oh, that's not going to happen, but every year they're actually starting to do what's called pre-piling, which means harvesting and processing earlier and earlier and earlier, because they know that, well, the piles may not freeze.
Well, I'm thinking, like, wait a second. I remember that corn can be grown further and further north, so at some point
right,
switch it to high fructose corn.
So, right, exactly, and that that's also, again, you've got these large systems battling it out. So what's happening is that the corn lobby is trying to lobby Congress to get rid of the sugar subsidies, because then they can kill the sugar industry, which means that now they can put high fructose corn syrup into more candy instead of sugar. And the corn lobby is bigger than the sugar lobby. And so, so at the point where the corn lobby wins, and then people right here will just be like, well, fine, let's just grow number 2 corn up here, which now they're doing. A lot of the areas in northern Minnesota now look like Iowa because it's so much warmer, season's so much longer.
It's like a
And so then the
Iowa.
Yeah. So, all right, we got a lot of comments. We're behind.
Jim writes, Gus Kroll also GMO'd and sprayed with glyphosate. I don't know. I'm not sure what that is. But...
Roundup.
Okay, Roundup. So yeah, and that's a whole other topic. But like, what we have to do in order to have the crops we have, there's some downsides to that. CK writes, there's this business as usual mindset happening in the midst of global human extinction events, and I just don't understand this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it is hard to see and understand. And, you know, on the other hand, it's also, I feel like from a compassionate point of view, sort of easy to understand because it's just overwhelming. And especially if there's no leadership and there's no communities that are thinking differently, and there's sort of no place to go for help or mutual aid. And coming up, you know, dreaming new things takes a lot of work and a lot of effort, and you take a lot of shit for it, right? And, you know, people say you're crazy and you're a loser and you're dumb and blah, blah. So there's social ostracization. You're ostracized. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a lot easier to just put your head down and keep going and hope everything's okay. And the problem is we're now at this point where it's clearer and clearer that is simply not going to be the case. And so, you know, I feel like those of us that are willing to have the gumption or the resources, the privilege, whatever it is, to be leaders in imagining something new, we have to do that. We just have to do that. There's so much suffering that's going to be going on.
And Ellen is the winner of transmission today because she
split her comment.
This is what we need to see more. When you have a long comment, do this. This is great. This is the first time I've seen this, and finally. Ellen writes, in the unique way I understand words, a gift bestowed upon me by neurodivergency, I interpret this as usually good, enjoyable things. As much as this too shall pass means bad stuff doesn't last, this saying would also mean even the best I've ever experienced will die and something different, better or worse, will take its place. Right. I mean, that adds nuance, like for good or for bad, this will pass. And so the things that we enjoy right now shall pass.
No.
Which is sounds angry and ineffective. Which I wish I was still wearing my shirt. So. No, but that's a good adding of nuance because progress and degress are both possibilities. I don't know if degress is a word, but you know what I'm saying. Ceres writes, I think we need to focus on intentional evolution and transformation instead of progress. Yes, like instead of assuming things, it's something we have to struggle for. Anything that we have that we can call progress is probably, it comes from struggle. Right? The progress assumes linearity, which is colonial and anti-evolution. We need to start thinking like a spiral and quantum rather than linearity. Maybe if we have a conversation around progress, it'd be good to have Ceres back on. Although we have to ask first. I'm not presuming or assuming that. But I think there's some really good ideas about different models of thinking about change for the positive, like how.
And one of the really interesting things, right, is that all of these indigenous systems, which were developed way longer ago than we normally think about them, none of them are linear. They're all circular, holistic, right? Spirals, wheels, um, elemental, multi-directional, and yeah, I just feel like we need to get more and more interested in all of that.
I'm not opposed to GMO as a rule, genetically modified organisms. Considering what we've done to the planet, I think we're going to suddenly need extreme heat-tolerant crops in a way we have not. Also, Gregor Mendel was genetically modifying his peas, breeding cattle or horses as genetically modifying. I think that's a big old topic, and I'm not opposed to it in general either, but there's complexity there. So some people, like, anytime we tinker with things, it's bad. And to me, it's how we tinker, for what reason, and who benefits and who loses is kind of a bigger set of questions.
Yeah, and the control and the industry and bad that's there's a there's a big difference between
genes that then it drifts over into the farmer's land, and now you own their crops. There's all kinds of weird stuff.
Yeah. I mean, breeding to take advantage of natural variation is very different than laboratory industrial modification, and one of the biggest problems, among other things, is that the laboratory modification makes very narrow, linear assumptions about what will happen to these genetic changes, that all of which prove to be incorrect, and then we get a lot of problems. All right, we're past our time, so we gotta blaze through some comments here.
And Stefan, you have a lot of comments about progress, and I'm going to blaze through them, even though I think they need more comment. But my assumption is we're going to talk about progress as a theme at some point in the near future. So don't feel like I'm just shutting you up or something.
Yeah, we're not dissing you.
Yeah, because I think it's really important how we can think about this. So, well, specifically slavery to feudalism to capitalism, or early unregulated capitalism to social capitalism, or absolute monarchy to representative democracy, or manus marriage to coverture marriage to partner marriage, or legal patriarchy to cultural patriarchy, et cetera, et cetera. There are many examples of progress, both throughout history and especially in the modern era in the last half a century with regards to minority rights. Much bad stuff, but there's progress. I mean, those specific cases where we've seen it actually happen, you could call that progress. Yeah. So sometimes systems go from crappy to better, and sometimes the other way. So I'm not disagreeing, like, where that's happened, which I don't think it always happens as much as we think. Like the idea that feudalism is gone, isn't it? Like, there's all kinds of, it's just, yeah.
Keep going, Mark.
I'm trying. I'm trying.
We'll pick it. We'll pick it up. I'm sorry, Ash. We'll pick it up on Wednesday too.
Serious rights. Regression and progression are two sides of the same colonial time coin. Colonization is an important piece of this idea of progress, especially how it's been used in the United States. The progressive movement was a colonial movement when it started under Teddy Roosevelt. Ellen Morey writes, "Don't you know that in that worship song, 'And He Shall Lift You Up Higher and Higher,' the you they are singing about refers to the SNPs? What's that? Like S&P 500? Maybe that's what it is." Viv writes, "Hi, once again weighing in on the vast importance of the expertise of mental health experts. Psychotherapist Elizabeth Mika, in December 31st, 2020. Much of our individual and collective trauma stems from quitting psychopaths in charge of the world." Here's a link. I'll leave that up for a second. Read her presentation on Dabrowski's theory of positive disintegration. And there's a reason why does our society, Bennett, seem to put psychopaths in power? It's because there's a psychopathic logic to our society, and that's better served by having psychopathic leaders. There's been all sorts of, thanks for bringing up. There's all sorts of things about CEOs and politicians having a certain mentality, the wealthy becoming mentally unstable in certain ways. Angelique writes, or Angelette, I'm not sure how to pronounce your name, I'm sorry. Can progress and simplicity coexist? How come progress often means it has to use complex technology and automation? Is progress equals no sweat?
Right. Yes. Well, that's a great way of framing some of the questions. Yeah, I think Wednesday, maybe we need to talk about progress. There's all kinds
Okay.
of really good stuff here about
Yeah,
that.
it's coming up a lot. Ceres writes, sugar, coffee, and corn are culturally appropriated and stolen from indigenous caretakers.
Yes, they are.
Joyce writes, plus, in a capitalist system, you need drugs to get through the insanity. I mean, that's the
Yeah.
thing. Like, why do those exist? It's for either the stimulants for productivity and the other things to make you not care about stuff as much. That's why alcohol is such big business. So you just don't give a fuck
Yeah.
about things being shitty sometimes. Gus writes, the other thing we should say about our food system is the immense waste that's built into it. It's somewhere in the range of 40% of the produced food in the U.S. and going in the bin before they reach the end user. That doesn't even include the food that spoils in your fridge.
Yeah.
Yes. Stefan, also about coping with adversity. Jesus had some good psychological advice. Example, to remember that getting caught up in our negative emotions is not going to add a cubit to our height, i.e. influence the reality around us. Great verse. Who can, by worrying, add a cubit to their height? That point is actually straight out of Stoicism. Seneca advises, often reminding ourselves on that point, among several others. And this gets into, I mean, you should have left that comment in our angry and effective week last week.
That's right.
That would have been an
Yes, that was
interesting
good
thing
for
to
last
engage.
week. Okay.
Viv writes, who can help with denial? Mental health experts, just saying. GNP?
Yeah.
Like, going back
Ellen was talking about the S&P 500. She was being sarcastic that the U is lifting up higher and higher, the stock market.
Yeah. GNP would
gotta,
also work in that
GNP
algorithm.
would work too.
Ellen also writes, you don't have to read this out, but in the car the other day, I'm gonna, because I just started.
We're going to.
Avi, a young philosopher at 5 years old, asked me, Mommy, why do the days make a circle that goes on and on like a wheel? And recited the days of the week a few times in a row.
There you go. Avi is our guru. So.
Why do we progress through the circle of time, Mother?
All right. Well, great to see and hear from everybody. Thank you very much. Appreciate you all. And we will be back on Wednesday.
See you Wednesday, everybody.
Stay safe. Bye. All right.